Question I see frequently asked in the SCAR community is, how do I go about tuning my rifle? Now, a lot of people are either new to the platform or getting around to putting a can on it or Form 1ing, or multiple of those. It could be immediately buying it to Form 1 and throw a can on. And they'll do some cursory glances at the forum and the SCAR sub and all that, and they'll see things like suppressing it voids your warranty and a myriad of different opinions and products mentioned to go about tuning this thing effectively so you're not going to damage your rifle. It's not really consolidated well. It's repeated a lot. So I'm going to make this video to talk about what you would need to do to tune your rifle. As to who I am, I'm a mechanical engineer that has a pretty decent round count on this thing, and I've had it for about a decade, and I like to put out information I would find helpful in my journey. I personally prefer video content, even if it's low format or low quality format, like what I make just talking in front of a camera, because I'm dyslexic and it's easier for me to learn that way as opposed to reading a mountain of text. So we're going to talk about all that fun stuff, and this applies to both to the 16 and the 17S, regardless of barrel length. So once you've determined what the OEM jet size for your barrel length is, or if it's already installed, go ahead and buy some jets and put them in a pillbox or something like that and label them. I'd recommend going in 0.1 millimeter increments, so it's got a little bit more adjustment between them. You can fine tune later if you find you would prefer a position in between them, but that is a very good place to start. You'll want to get a tool to remove them. They're not a normal flathead size, they're easy to strip, and if you've got a lot of carbon in your gas block from shooting a lot, they might strip because of that too. So I'd recommend getting it a little toasty, apply some heat with like a torch, give it a little reddish hue to it, not glowing obviously, and then it'll be easier to remove. You can also apply anti-seize to, again, make it easier to remove in the future. So I recommend doing that, and I recommend the food grade stuff. It's not as annoying, doesn't get everywhere, and most of it's better for your health when it aerolyzes. But you can go ahead and immediately start tuning there. If you have a specific scenario, like you're only going to shoot one type of ammo, only suppressed or only unsuppressed, you can probably just skip the regulators and start there. You can go get a regulator later, but I'd recommend starting there. What you'll want to do is take the factory recommended size and test function from a fully loaded mag +1. So insert a mag, chamber around, remove it, top it off, reinsert. It's the hardest possible feeding condition. If it feeds, remove that mag and insert an empty mag and see if that locks back. If it does, click it over to the vented position and repeat. Assuming it still cycles, go to the next jet size down and see if that passes or fails. You want to find where it fails so you know what the condition your rifle needs to be in to function. Once it fails, you should go up 0.1 millimeter, regardless of which position it fails in. That way you have a bit of margin above. If you run the bare minimum you need to cycle the rifle, you will likely have unintended malfunctions when your rifle gets particularly dirty, or if you change environments, you go somewhere where it's cold or higher altitude, for example. Now, obviously, you're not optimized for both use cases. You can only really do that specifically to suppressed or unsuppressed. Either you're going to have some overgassing suppressed, or you're not going to be able to run unsuppressed if you tune for specific suppressor use. Some people don't care. They're only going to run one way, and that's fine. If you want to do both, then you're probably going to want to buy an aftermarket regulator, unless you're comfortable with that amount of overgassing suppressed. The options are the Mototech 3 Select, the Scarburator, and the KNS discarder. The 3 Select is the most similar to OEM. I've found that it is not a significant improvement from OEM. I would recommend going with one of the other two, depending on your needs. Its exit port in the front, difficult to see, is slightly more restrictive, as well as the bleed-off ports here. And for the single bleed-off port there's not a channel cut, but there is a channel cut for the two. That's likely just because there would be a very thin wall right there. And that channel is not cut to the full depth that the OEM is, so you're getting a slightly more tortuous gas path out, all to mean that it's worse at venting. However, it is better at restricting because you have slightly tapered down holes as you adjust it. That's a theme with the Mototech regulators. They believe that restriction is the way to go. You see, okay, with the Scarburator, You have one position, you turn this knurled knob. You may not be able to see it because my camera is not very good and my light died. But as I turn it, there's a cylinder on the inside that has a helical cut to it. One side is taller than the other. It's not flat. So as you turn it, it'll slightly cover that hole, bit by bit, until it's fully covered. What that does is it further restricts flow. It also, like OEM, has a port in the front and the 2 ports in the side to bleed off gas. It is slightly more torturous for bleed off in this case as well, because it is not a straight shot out. Due to the design of the regulator, this part is wider than the gas block is at that point, so it has a scoop up, so the gas has to push past that surface. Does it really matter a whole lot? It's probably not a whole lot worse, but with this particular gas regulator, you're getting more graduated restriction than you would with the gas jets. So what you can do is, again, if you're doing a very specific thing, this probably is a pretty good regulator, because what you can do is you can get in between the sizes effectively by having a more in-between restriction. However, it is a little inconsistent. It's a very fine resolution between the adjustments, and sometimes one position will function and then sometimes it won't. I've had some inconsistency with it. If you're running mostly unsuppressed, it's a bit better, but suppressed, it's kind of weird. So unless you're tuning way down, you're probably not going to get this to function both unsuppressed and suppressed well. In my case, I stepped down to a 1.8 millimeter jet. For my barrel length, the 2.0 is the recommended. And this, unless it's in the all the way closed position, will cycle my rifle unsuppressed. So I'm not having a whole lot of room to tune down suppressed. I could keep going in jets, but then you're going down quite a ways at that point. Alternatively, you can use the KNS discard, which is what I like most. It is a bleed off regulator. It does not restrict flow at all. It has one port. It has an internal cylinder there. That has 3 diffusion holes in this triangular slot to bleed off gas. And then you can fully cover it for no venting, or you can occlude it with a helical cut cylinder, like the Mototech, to have various amounts of venting. Again, what you're doing is you're making the path more tortuous for the gas to flow out, more difficult for the gas to flow out, maintaining peak pressures longer. Between the two, the KNS is a little harder to adjust, which also makes it harder to accidentally adjust. Upsides and downsides to that, as well as allegedly it produces more flash, which in theory makes sense. You're letting more gas and powder that's burning out of the system. However, I've not noticed it to be particularly significant. I've seen a photo where someone opened it all the way, so you're not occluding the outlet at all, and there was a little bit of flash. It wasn't like a fireball, but you could see inside of the triangular cut there was flash. I typically don't run mine there. I run mine around like position 5 to 7, typically suppressed, and it's not particularly significant. Even when standing next to people, I've not noticed a fireball coming out. If you're really paying attention, you can see a little bit of flame inside of it, but I've not found it to be any more significant than what's already coming out of my silencer. Once you get the system really hot, you tend to get some more unburnt powder coming out of your silencer and creating flash anyway, at least out of a 10.5-inch barrel. Now, someone with nods, you may be able to tell. If you have nods, you can probably afford to test both and compare them, or take out a loan to test both and compare them, depending how you afforded your nods. Because if that really matters to you, then I would recommend doing further testing. But for most of us that like to shoot for fun and don't want to damage our rifle, the KNS gives you better overall adjustment. And I would argue that if you're running it all the way open for suppress, you've not really tuned optimally. Between the two, regardless of which one you choose, the process for testing is the same. As before, you're going to put in some jet. If you already test and found one that works okay, go ahead and put that one in it. Put in your regulator. Start in the highest position, unsuppressed of course, and then test function, both feeding and lockback, and if it passes, go to the next lowest position and repeat. Do that until you get a failure, and then likely go up a couple positions. You don't want to run it just one above, and that's where you can run unsuppressed. go ahead, mess around, play around a bit, shoot, see if you can outrun your bolt carrier. I can if I run my KNS 1 or 2 positions above the position it'll fail in, and you might want to check multiple loadings. For example, 223, 556, 77 grain versus M193 all have 3 different positions where they'll fail in, stacked on top of each other. So 8, 9, 10, for example, you might want to, or well, they run in 8, 9, 10, I should say. So you might want to check those, see what you shoot mostly. Are you happy with where that position is? For example, if you need to run in the fully closed position unsuppressed, you probably want to adjust. Or if you need to run fully vented suppressed to get failures, you might want to adjust. You don't need to get failures suppressed, but if you do, that's great because you'll know how much margin you have. In my case, I want to predominantly shoot suppressed and shoot unsuppressed sometimes. So I settled for a failure position unsuppressed around the 3/4 range in the regulator. So 8, 9, 10, like I said. And if I run suppressed, if I'm using a higher flow rate can, like the CGS Helios, it's not like a Hux can or anything, but using that can around position 4 to 6, depending on ammo and muzzle device and all that. It's a particularly unique silencer. The muzzle device influences its back pressure quite a lot. Then if I'm running something like the Polonium K, which I have on it now, then if I want to fail, I got to go fairly low, almost all the way open. But to get the desiring cycling speed I want for both of those, run it a few above what it needs, with the Helios usually position 7 or 8, and with the Polonium between 5 and 7, depending on ammo. And it's not being ridiculously aggressive. You're reducing parts life, or you're increasing parts life, or reducing parts wear. And if you just want to have fun, you can turn it way down and just goof around. But realistically, you want a little bit of overgassing because it helps returning to 0. When you pull the trigger, if your gun cycle's real slow, you have more time that you are trying to pull the gun down, so it's perceiving more work. Whereas if it cycles faster, it does a lot of the work at getting you back on target itself. I found that I actually have a harder time controlling the recoil when I've tuned it to barely cycle, because it takes a lot longer to dip back down. And then if I do a lot of work, it'll actually dip more than I anticipated. But it's fairly easy. See where it fails. If you're not happy with where it is, the general rule of thumb is if you want it to fail lower, go up in port diameter in your jet. If you want it to fail higher, go down in port diameter in your jet. Theory on that is you are needing more gas to cycle lower. You need the regulator to work harder to restrict or to vent more. You're putting more gas in the system. Or you need it to work less hard. You're putting less gas in the system. If you have any questions, you can, as usual, DM me or ask in the Scar sub. But hopefully this gives people enough of an idea of what they need to do to tune their rifle and answer some of the frequently asked questions.